The gift of life, the autumn rain, tapped gently against the windows of Metropolitan General Hospital as Olivia Bennett adjusted her navy blue scrubs and stepped into the quiet hallway. At 29, she had spent 6 years in these corridors, witnessing miracles and heartbreaks in equal measure. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her hazel eyes carried a depth that came from understanding loss far too intimately. Olivia moved through her morning rounds with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, updating charts, and offering comfort to patients who needed more than medicine. Her colleagues often commented on her unusual ability to remain present even in chaos, to find the right words when others fell silent. What they didn't know was that this gift had been forged in fire, shaped by a grief that still lived beneath her calm exterior. 3 years ago, her younger sister Emma had been just 23 when polycystic kidney disease began stealing her life away. Olivia remembered every agonizing moment of that year, watching Emma grow weaker despite every treatment, every prayer, every desperate hope. They had waited for a donor match that never came. The transplant list was long, and Emma's rare blood type made finding a match nearly impossible. By the time winter arrived, Emma was gone, leaving behind a void that no amount of time could fill. In the weeks after Emma's funeral, Olivia found herself unable to eat or sleep. The guilt consumed her, even though logically she knew there was nothing more she could have done. One gray morning, she walked into the organ donor registry office downtown and filled out the paperwork to become a living donor. The counselor had asked if she was sure, if she understood the risks, if she was doing this for the right reasons. Olivia had simply answered that she couldn't save her sister, but maybe she could save someone else's. Now, 18 months later, her phone rang during a late shift. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, belonging to Dr. Patricia Morrison from the Transplant Coordination Center. They had a critical match, a patient in end-stage renal failure with less than 48 hours remaining. Blood type AB negative, extremely rare. The patient had been on dialysis for nearly 2 years and their body was beginning to shut down. Olivia's blood type, her tissue markers, everything aligned perfectly. Would she be willing to proceed immediately? Olivia didn't hesitate. She agreed to be at the hospital within the hour for pre-surgical testing. As she hung up, she felt something shift inside her chest, not fear, but purpose. This was why she had registered, why she had waited through months of silence. Somewhere in this same city, someone was fighting to survive, and she could help. Across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the river, Dominic Hayes sat in his home office, staring at financial reports he could no longer focus on. At 34, he had built Novatech Industries from a small startup into a billion-dollar tech empire, revolutionizing cloud computing and artificial intelligence. His success had made him wealthy beyond measure, but it had also cost him nearly everything else. 4 years ago, his wife Claire had died in a car accident on her way to one of his company events. He had thrown himself into work afterward, using 18-hour days to avoid feeling anything. But 2 years ago, his body began betraying him. Fatigue turned to weakness, weakness to hospitalizations. The diagnosis was blunt and terrifying. His kidneys were failing, damaged by an undiagnosed autoimmune condition that had silently attacked his system for years. Dominic had tried every treatment, consulted specialists around the world, and poured millions into experimental therapies. Nothing worked. Now he was tethered to dialysis machines 3 times a week, watching his empire continue to grow while his body withered. He rarely left his apartment anymore, conducting board meetings via video conference, his face growing gaunt behind the professional facade. His assistant called him that evening with unexpected news. They had found a donor match, and the surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Dominic felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with fear. Part of him wondered if he deserved this chance, if accepting a stranger's sacrifice was somehow taking something meant for someone more worthy. But survival instinct won out. He agreed immediately. The surgery took place before dawn in separate operating rooms. Olivia was wheeled in first, her hand briefly squeezing the attending nurse's fingers as the anesthesia began pulling her under. She thought of Emma one last time, whispering a silent promise that this gift would honor her sister's memory. In another room, Dominic lay unconscious as the surgical team prepared to receive the kidney that would save his life. Hours passed. Olivia woke in recovery to the sound of monitoring equipment and the dull ache spreading through her left side. Dr. Morrison appeared beside her bed, smiling warmly. The surgery was successful, she said. The patient was stable, and the kidney was already functioning. Olivia nodded weakly, relief flooding through her despite the pain. She had done it. Someone would live because she chose to give. Dominic woke in a private recovery suite to the sensation of breathing without the crushing fatigue that had become his constant companion. For the first time in 2 years, his body felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. His doctor informed him the transplant was a complete success. The donor had been anonymous, a young woman who wanted nothing in return. Dominic asked her name, but the doctor shook his head. That information was protected. All they could tell him was that she had saved his life without ever expecting thanks. 2 weeks later, Olivia returned to work against her doctor's recommendations. She needed the routine, the purpose, and honestly, she needed the money. Medical bills from the donation surgery had been covered, but her regular expenses hadn't disappeared during her recovery. She moved more slowly through her shifts, careful not to lift anything too heavy, masking the discomfort with practiced smiles. She never told anyone at the hospital what she had done. It wasn't their business, and she didn't want special treatment or uncomfortable conversations. This had been her choice, her private act of healing. But sometimes, late at night when the corridors grew quiet, she wondered about the person who received her kidney. Were they recovering well? Did they have family celebrating this second chance? She hoped they were grateful, not to her specifically, but to life itself. Meanwhile, Dominic began the slow process of reclaiming his existence. The post-surgery protocols were strict: immunosuppressant medications on precise schedules, careful monitoring, restricted activities. But each day brought small victories: walking without exhaustion, thinking clearly, imagining a future beyond. Survival. He became obsessed with finding his donor, not to repay an unpayable debt, but simply to understand who would make such a sacrifice for a stranger. His private investigators hit dead ends. The hospital's confidentiality protocols were absolute, but Dominic was nothing if not persistent. He began spending time at Metropolitan General, initially for follow-up appointments, but then lingering afterward, watching the staff, observing the rhythms of the place. He told himself he was being ridiculous, that he would never find her this way. Yet something kept drawing him back, a pull he couldn't explain, as if his body somehow recognized the presence of its savior even when his mind could not. Unexpected encounters. The hospital garden had become Olivia's sanctuary during breaks. Tucked behind the east wing, it was a small pocket of peace with stone benches, flowering bushes, and a fountain that murmured soothingly. She sat there one October afternoon, her lunch untouched beside her, simply breathing in the cool air and trying to ignore the persistent ache in her side that wouldn't quite fade. She had been back at work for 3 weeks, but her body was slower to recover than she had anticipated. The surgery itself had been routine, but the emotional and physical toll was proving more complex. Some mornings she woke feeling accomplished and at peace. Other days she felt hollowed out, as if giving away part of herself had left a space that nothing could refill. Her savings account was nearly empty, and her recent paycheck had gone entirely to rent and utilities. She had applied for a few extra shifts, but her supervisor had gently denied them, citing concern about her recovery timeline. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the man who entered the garden until he sat on the bench across from her. He was tall and lean, dressed in an expensive charcoal coat that seemed out of place in the humble hospital setting. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his blue eyes held a faraway quality, as if he was searching for something he couldn't name. Dominic had come to the garden on impulse, needing air after another follow-up appointment that confirmed what he already knew. He was healing remarkably well. Dr. Morrison had been pleased, even surprised by how quickly his body had accepted the transplant. She attributed it to an exceptionally compatible donor match. Dominic had pressed again for information, any detail at all, but the doctor remained firm. Patient confidentiality was sacred. He noticed the nurse sitting across from him, her tired eyes and the way she held herself carefully, as if favoring one side. Something about her presence was calming. She looked up and caught him staring, and he quickly glanced away, embarrassed. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to intrude on your space." Olivia shook her head. "It's a public garden. You're welcome here." She studied him for a moment, noting the pallor of someone recently ill, the way his clothes hung slightly loose on his frame. "Are you a patient?" "Was," Dominic replied. "Just follow-ups now. You work here?" "Nurse, yes. 6 years." She gestured to her scrubs with a faint smile. "The uniform gives it away." They fell into an easy silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. After a while, Dominic spoke again. "Can I ask you something about donors?" Olivia's breath caught slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. "What about them? If someone received an organ from an anonymous donor, how would they, is there any way to thank them? To let them know what their gift meant?" Olivia considered her answer carefully. "I think anonymous donors choose anonymity for a reason. They don't want gratitude or recognition. They just want the person to live well, to make the most of their second chance. That's thanks enough." Dominic nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "That seems impossibly selfless." "Maybe," Olivia said softly. "Or maybe it's the only way they could heal from something else." Their eyes met, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither could articulate. Then Olivia's pager beeped, shattering the moment. She stood carefully, wincing slightly as she did. "You okay?" Dominic asked, concern. "Immediate. Just recovering from a minor procedure." She deflected. "Take care of yourself." As she walked away, Dominic watched her go, noting the way she moved, the subtle protection of her left side. A thought began forming in his mind, impossible and yet suddenly undeniable. Over the following weeks, Dominic became a regular presence at Metropolitan General. He volunteered for their technology upgrade committee, donating equipment and expertise anonymously through his foundation. He attended support groups for transplant recipients, hoping someone might mention knowing a donor. He spent hours in the hospital cafeteria and gardens, always watching, always hoping. Olivia began noticing him. The man from the garden appeared, frequently, always alone, always watching the hospital staff with quiet intensity. She learned from gossip that he was Dominic Hayes, the tech billionaire, though she had barely recognized him from the business articles she'd occasionally seen. He looked different in person, more vulnerable, more human. She also began noticing strange kindnesses appearing throughout the hospital. The nurses' break room suddenly had a professional espresso machine. The pediatric ward received a generous donation of toys and tablets. Staff parking permits were mysteriously covered for a month. When she asked administration about it, they mentioned an anonymous benefactor who wanted to support hospital workers. One evening, Olivia found herself back in the garden, exhausted from a double shift that had pushed her body beyond its limits. She sat heavily on her usual bench, fighting back tears of frustration. The medical bills she thought were covered had revealed hidden costs. Her landlord was raising rent, and her car needed repairs she couldn't afford. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had given a kidney to save a life, and now she was drowning. "You look like you're carrying the world," a familiar voice said. She looked up to find Dominic standing nearby, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one. "I noticed you come here often. Thought you might need this." Olivia accepted the cup, too tired to refuse. "Thank you. It's been a rough day." Dominic sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can I help?" "I know that sounds presumptuous from a stranger, but I've learned recently that sometimes strangers can offer what friends can't. No judgment, no expectations." Something in his tone made Olivia open up in ways she hadn't with anyone since Emma died. She told him about the financial pressures, about feeling exhausted all the time, about wondering if she'd made the right choice with the donation, even though she knew morally she had. She didn't mention the donation specifically, keeping it vague, but the emotion poured out. Dominic listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he spoke carefully. I recently received a tremendous gift from someone I've never met. It saved my life. And all I want is to make sure that person doesn't suffer because of their generosity. If there was any way I could help them without violating their privacy, I would do it in a heartbeat. Olivia met his eyes, and in that moment, something clicked. The timeline, his presence at the hospital, the way he looked at her, the matching recovery periods. Her hand unconsciously moved to her left side, where the incision scar still pulled sometimes. When was your surgery? She asked quietly. September 18th, he answered. Why? Olivia's heart began racing. That was her date too. She started to speak, then stopped, fear and hope warring in her chest. Dominic noticed her reaction. Very slowly, with permission asked through his eyes, he lifted his shirt slightly, revealing a surgical scar on his right side, exactly where a transplanted kidney would be placed. Olivia's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she mirrored his action, showing her own scar on the left side, the donor side. They stared at each other as the truth settled between them like falling snow. Quiet and transformative. It was you, Dominic whispered, his voice breaking. You saved my life. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. I never wanted you to know. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know, he said, his own eyes wet. But I'm grateful anyway. Not just for the kidney, but for the second chance, for the reminder that humans can be extraordinarily kind. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, and she let him take it. They sat there in the garden as darkness fell, two people whose lives had been literally intertwined by sacrifice and chance, beginning to understand that some connections transcend logic and explanation. In the weeks that followed, Dominic made it his mission to ensure Olivia never struggled financially again. He set up a trust anonymously at first, until she discovered it and confronted him. They argued about it in the hospital parking lot, her pride battling his guilt, until finally they reached a compromise. She would help him build a foundation to support living donors, using her experience to guide policy and program development. Working together, they discovered compatibility that went beyond tissue markers. Olivia's compassion balanced Dominic's pragmatism. His resources amplified her vision. They spent long evenings planning the Donor Care Foundation, creating support systems that neither of them had access to during their own journeys. Somewhere in those planning sessions, between budget discussions and program proposals, they fell in love. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was a gradual recognition that they had each found in the other exactly what they'd been missing. Olivia learned to accept help, to let someone care for her. Dominic learned to be vulnerable, to value human connection over achievement. 6. Months after their garden revelation, Dominic brought Olivia back to that same bench. The spring flowers were blooming, and the fountain sparkled in the late afternoon sun. He knelt before her, holding a simple platinum ring. You gave me life when I had given up hope, he said. You taught me that generosity isn't a transaction, it's a choice. I don't want to repay a debt because there is no debt between us. I want to build a future. Will you marry me? Olivia laughed through tears, pulling him up to his feet. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed in the garden where their paths had first crossed, two people who had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts we give are the ones that come back to us in ways we never imagined, not as obligation or repayment, but as love, pure and transformative, a second chance at life in every possible way. The Donor Care Foundation opened its doors the following year with Olivia as director and Dominic as primary benefactor. Together, they created a model that protected donors, supported recipients, and celebrated the quiet heroes who chose to give. And in the foundation's central garden, they planted 2 trees side by side, their branches eventually intertwining, growing together toward the sky, just like the two people who had learned that sometimes saving a life means saving your own. Retry.